Hello, and welcome to the Critical Path Institute podcast. Our goal for this podcast is to connect the dots among our core competencies in regulatory science, biomarkers, data management and standards, clinical outcome assessments, and modeling and analytics, and how we accelerate drug development. CPath created this podcast for researchers, clinicians, and industry and regulatory professionals with the hope that these conversations and the resources we share will advance your efforts and partnerships to improve global health.
Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of the CPath podcast, where we connect the dots between science, clinical medicine, research, drug development, and the patient's voice. Today I have two really cool guests because they're not just staff, they are people living with conditions. And you're going to hear some of their insights, some of their stories that they have been brave in sharing with not just us, but now they're going to share those stories with you. So let's get started. I have Hailey and Alex. Hailey, why don't you introduce yourself, share your title, and then we'll go to Alex for an introduction, and then we'll get the conversation started.
Sure. My name is Hailey Davenport. I'm a senior project manager for the Type 1 Diabetes Consortium, and I've been working with CPath for almost 5 years now.
And I'm Alex Diegel, Assistant Director of Communications here at CPath. Recognize our impact stories, our blogs, and this very podcast is our work with the communications crew. And happy to be here and talk about our respective journeys.
Excellent. Thank you both. You work at very different functions with us, and certainly your stories are pretty unique. Let's start with Hailey, who joined us when her diagnosis had already been established and she was already being treated, but she found the work at CPath extremely meaningful with an additional added value to her. So Hailey, can you share some of that story with us?
Absolutely. So for me, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 14 years old. This has kind of driven my entire career, but specifically when I was 14, it was a really big deal to have a diagnosis like that. I was really healthy otherwise. I was a dancer and a runner. I was a freshman in high school when all of a sudden I just got really, really sick for no reason, it seemed like. I was losing a lot of weight and just really ill. And so after going to my pediatrician's office, pretty much immediately they diagnosed me with type 1 diabetes. And there was really no way to know at that point kind of the journey ahead and just the psychological and physical burden of the disease. I've lived with type 1 diabetes for 17 years now. And I do feel really lucky to have technologies like an insulin pump and continuous glucose monitoring. But I think what a lot of people don't necessarily understand is how complex the disease is, how invisible it is, and how even though there is treatment options, we still struggle so much daily from the physical and the psychological burden. So I was initially drawn to CPath in 2021 because of their work with type 1 diabetes, specifically with qualifying islet autoantibodies as a marker for drug trials to hopefully delay the onset of the disease or stop it before the autoimmune process even starts. But I actually started my path at CPath working in rare disease research, working in sickle cell and also Huntington's disease. And that was super meaningful to me because even though I have T1D, I've always been so grateful that there are treatment options, and then other rare diseases have no options pretty much at all. So I really found a lot of meaning in that work because there's just no options for these people. It wasn't until the last year that I've switched over to working with my own disease in type 1 diabetes. And it's really meaningful because I think CPath takes a very creative and innovative approach to kind of solving these big issues with certain diseases, but also connecting the dots between certain disease areas, such as Parkinson's and T1D, learning to kind of treat the underlying disease rather than the symptoms. And I think that's something that's so important that will hopefully help so many people with different diseases as well.
Great, thank you, Hailey. And for anyone, you should check the podcast episode with Diane Stevenson and Joe Hedrick, where we connected the dots between what we've learned in terms of accelerating drug development between type 1 diabetes and Parkinson's disease, which is way more than meets the eye. Now let's turn to Alex. Your story and your journey was a little bit different because, unlike Hailey, who came with us already diagnosed and under treatment, you started our work with us, and it was during your tenure that you actually confirmed your diagnosis.
Correct. Yeah. So it was about a year ago that I was going through day 5 or so with a flu fever, 100-degree fever, multiple days in a row. Was brushing it off, being pretty much a toxic male about it, bragging about how I could tough through it, work through 102-degree fever, whatever. I was actually, having just that and talking with our PMO director, Mike Minchak, and he's like, dude, go to the hospital. It is day 5 of you at like 101 to 102-degree fever. So I did, and they just did a standard urinalysis on intake, and they kind of just said, sir, we're detecting an alarming amount of blood and protein in your urine. Again, I'm a communications guy here at CPATH. I'm not a doctor, but I knew enough to say, well, that ain't good. So the journey kind of started then and there at the hospital. We did all the tests, ruled out the scariest things like severe kidney damage or liver damage, things like that. So it was just kind of like, oh, well, you're good. You don't have cancer, you don't have X, Y, or Z. I was like, but like you just told me I'm leaking proteins in blood here essentially, like that, something's got to be off. But because I was healthy otherwise, they kind of just sent me home, got me outpatient with a nephrologist. Same test a week later. They're like, oh, it didn't go away. Like they thought they were, even just that my body was stressed out from how sick I was maybe just throwing off my system. But again, a week later, same thing. It's like, okay, well, what's the plan? Like, oh, well, you're healthy, so we're just going to wait and see. Fast forward a couple months later, getting close to Father's Day, I think I got a little bit sick again, but I definitely noticed the discolored urine, the brownish urine, and was like, all right, wait and see does not work for me anymore. I basically, as I learned from CPATH, had to be my best advocate and say, like, I need a biopsy and I need it now. So that kind of journey upon the diagnosis, once we got the biopsy results, it was IgA neuropathy, which fortunately is the most common and treatable to a degree form of CKD. So I felt almost kind of lucky to get that diagnosis, and I did get some answers, but still it was scary. Again, I'm the communications guy, I'm the word guy. The words chronic kidney and disease are extremely terrifying when used to describe your own body. Excuse me. Not getting emotional yet. It's February, so always battling a little bit cold.
Thank you, Alex. As you can see, this is a couple of young professionals with very different backgrounds. They're very different jobs here at CPATH, but they share one thing in common. We all have some form of a diagnosis in one way or another, and we have to live with it. And we cannot allow the diagnosis to define us, but we can do something about it to make our lives better through it. And the work that you do at CPATH certainly helps with that. So let's move on to some of the things that have proven to be eye-opening insights from our work. You started, Hailey, with you already connect a lot of dots because you have your background in engineering, you're a project manager, you get to see the execution of the different efforts. You've covered several different collaborations at CPATH. Now you're working in type 1 diabetes. Tell us more about the notion that people might think, well, but there's insulin, you're already being treated, so Why do we need more work in type 1 diabetes? Can you comment on that from your perspective, both as a project manager working in that world, but also as someone living with the condition?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's something that's so misunderstood about the disease for type 1 specifically, is that people think you just take insulin and you go about your day as normal, like many diseases have drugs. But with diabetes and treating it with insulin, it's like you're constantly trying to hit a moving target. Your blood sugar is fluctuating constantly throughout the day. There's so many factors that can affect your blood sugar besides just diet and exercise. Hormones, stress, caffeine, being sick, they can all make your blood sugars fluctuate. And having high blood sugar and low blood sugar is both dangerous. High blood sugar increases the fear of future complications, so I have to worry about the threat of kidney disease, neuropathy, and a whole host of other complications. So it is really overwhelming in that sense, but also just day to day, having a low blood sugar is really acutely dangerous. You can kind of pass out, go into a coma if you don't treat it. That really affects quality of life from a day to day, just having to make so many countless decisions every second of the day in the background. And that's even with, I'm very fortunate to have an insulin pump and a continuous glucose monitoring system. So like I know what's going on and I'm really grateful for that. But even with the constant attention and constant care, I still don't have the level of control that I think a lot of people think would be easy with type 1. And so I think that's why the patient experience is so important, to understand that we still have that physical, but also the psychological burden that persists, even though we have insulin keeping us alive, but our quality of life is not where it could be.
Excellent. Thank you, Hailey. So you see how we've identified a number of unmet needs, and we're looking to address them through the collaborative work that we run. And Hailey is now very competently making sure that everyone keeps honest with the timelines and the deliverables. Alex, your function, right? So you help us communicate our impact and our work to the outside world. So you are constantly wanting to make sure that the message is toned towards the audience. But I think you also have now an eye-opening insight from your own self regarding to the work that you do. So can you comment on how that has been for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, not to beat it in the ground, that is connecting all the dots here and why we're sitting here talking about it. But so upon my diagnosis for Father's Day and Men's Health Awareness Month in June, I had written an impact story detailing kind of everything I just explained. And we, as an organization, we want to shift to getting that more people-focused messaging, right? Like really get to the bottom of what our work does and the lives it improves, right? So I kind of felt like I was living about it and writing the type of storytelling that we want to do here at CPATH. And then, so that was mine back in May or June, and then we're coming up on November of last year is T1D Awareness Month. So Hailey had already bravely shared her story in other venues for us, including in Tucson last year. So I thought, let's do kind of a matching impact story with Hailey, talking about her experience and the uniqueness of living with T1D and working in T1D with our T1D Consortium. And in reading her story, just doing my job reviewing it, I noticed some really strong similarities behind our experiences. Specifically like that fever, right? Like I went in for a high fever. Hailey, I believe you thought at some point your first round of issues that you were having was fever. Mm-hmm. So it was like, wow, like that's the same thing. And then she had a great phrase in her piece called thinking like an organ. And that is just so accurate, right? We were talking about this as we were kind of prepping, if I had known about this having kidney disease 10 years ago, I'm still an active athlete myself. I almost intentionally dehydrate myself just through exercise. I would have taken different precautions, right? I'm at 2 bottles of Pedialyte now as I continue to, do my sports, do my rugby, basketball, whatever. That's something I would have started 10 years ago. Again, not intentionally working my way into a lather with a sweat by working out in sweatpants and sweatshirts. So, not knowing it, I was doing all the things to really stress my kidneys. And now, as I find that balance to, continue to do my passions, I'm in Captain Pedialyte 2 bottles a week. Just always thinking about being hydrated, things of that nature.
Yeah, awesome. And I recall the conversation you and I had about Pedialyte at one point, because I'm also an avid user of that thing. But let's now connect the dots between the impact, right? So you're here because this is an exciting work environment for you both as professionals, but it also links to meaning for what type of legacy you want to leave behind. And so comment on that a little bit if you can.
Sure,
yeah,
go ahead, Hailey.
Absolutely. So I think for me, since I have been an engineer and I've worked in different parts of clinical research for my whole career, I've seen a lot of the bottlenecks that can happen when trying to address these big issues around disease treatments. And so I think it's meaningful for me to work at CPATH to help kind of, as a project manager, contain the environment where we can bring together groups that can solve issues that no one group can basically solve on their own. I think that's incredibly meaningful. I also, like, living with chronic illness, you develop so much empathy for people that also live with chronic illness. So it's always been a goal of mine to have that be the center of my job. But I really feel at CPATH that I'm helping people with the work that I do. It's really meaningful that the patient voice is heard so loudly at CPATH, and I think that is the missing link in a lot of what we're trying to solve and figure out.
Yeah, Hailey, thank you for that setup. Another way we can connect the dots here at CPATH, and again, why I thought this would be an interesting story to tell and share, and just from my learning with that biomarker data repository community and having regular meetings with a nephrologist in that community, Gary Friedman, is that, with CKD, we'd like to see it get to the point of T1D, where you can get some instant answers. You have some, the GCMs that can kind of tell you exactly how you're doing health-wise. That's not to diminish it or say that it makes it easier or anything like that, but it is a great model to know, get an instant check-in, right? Whereas my process, if I have to feel like something's off, is, book an appointment with the nephrologist, have the appointment, wait for the callback. It'd be great, as Gary and I talk about, is to almost have these urinary test dipsticks that we could use and see my creatinine's up or it's down and I'm doing great. So something we talk about here at CPATH is preventative medicine, early intervention, early interaction, just empowering and informing the patient. And that's, again, where I think it's interesting, and what we wanted to chat about today is kind of getting CKD to that T1D model. And, this is not a company plug. This is living and just appreciating being here for 3 years now. It's not only do I learn more about T1D than I would have if I was just on my own working somewhere else, living with CKD, but just all of our different therapeutic areas and bringing that into my life where I can, right? I'll never be a scientist, a regulatory scientist, but just the sense of community that I've gained at CPATH. Like I said, I found that initial diagnosis to be relieving, that it was a relatively minor form. And then I thought, if I wanted to get into advocacy, are people going to really care? Are they going to be like, you're not sick enough, it could be way worse? Couldn't have been further from the truth. Immediately got connected to the BMDR community, reached out to Klaus when I had questions, if I wasn't getting them as quickly as I wanted from my nephrologist. Just have all these amazing resources at CPATH to learn not just about myself, but when people in my circle have something. We have a Duchenne Consortium. I recently found out that my friend's young son was diagnosed with Duchenne. Without CPATH, all I could have done was Google what Duchenne is, because I would have never heard of it, and offer my sympathy. With CPATH, immediately got them connected to Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, a chapter near them, got them, personal conversation with the great Pat Furlong, and they told us, just how much that meant to them to give them hope for their son, and just, again, instill in them a sense of community that they're not doing it alone. It's tough, but there's people there, there's resources out there for you.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for sharing your insights, sharing your story. As I said in the beginning, you sharing your stories, it shows a level of bravery that is certainly to be admired. The way in which you don't allow your conditions to define you is pretty humbling. But the fact that you work every day to find solutions, not just for the people that live with your conditions, but potentially the people that could be prevented from even having the conditions, and find better solutions that can accelerate better treatments for those people is really inspiring, and that's what inspires us. So with that, I will thank you both for joining us today. And to the audience, thank you for the time. I think this was one of the most moving episodes we've done. And stay tuned for the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Did you enjoy this episode? Share it with a friend or colleague, or leave a review on iTunes, and help others discover and support our mission. We are welcoming guests with a range of experiences and viewpoints. The views expressed belong to the guests themselves. Learn more about Critical Path Institute at cpath.org. That's c-path.org. Stay tuned for our next episode coming soon, and thanks for listening.